I want to start today with a statement from our source material that, frankly, sounded a little alarmist when I first read it.
Yeah, it's definitely a bold hook.
Right, because I'm reading this, and the author claims that the scarcest resource of the 21st century isn't going to be water. It's not going to be oil or cobalt or, rare earth minerals.
No. According to the late Professor Pierluigi Piazzi, the scarcest resource is intelligence.
Which, on the surface just feels wrong, doesn't it? I mean, we are drowning in information right now.
Uh,
I have the sum of human knowledge in my pocket. If anything, shouldn't we be living in this golden age of
you
genius?
would think so, but that is exactly the trap that this book, Aprendendo Inteligencia, or Learning Intelligence, is really trying to expose.
Yeah.
We are constantly confusing access to data with actual intelligence. Professor Peer, who, by the way, spent over 50 years in the classroom and prepared something like 100,000 students for these brutal entrance exams.
Which is an insane amount of experience.
Right. He argues that we are actually in the middle of a massive global brain drain. And it's not because smart people are leaving the country. It's because we are systematically training ourselves to be stupid.
Systematically training ourselves to be stupid. That is a heavy accusation.
It is, but he really backs it up. He argues that between a flawed education system that just prioritizes rote memorization and, well, a culture of constant digital distraction, we are physically altering our brains for the worse.
We're losing the ability to think deeply.
Exactly. We're being dumbed down by mass communication.
So for everyone listening, this deep dive isn't going to be about, study hacks. We aren't here to talk about which color highlighter to use or Pomodoro timers.
Not at all. This is, as Pierre calls it, a manual for survival.
A survival manual. I love that framing.
Because the premise is that in a world where automation and AI are taking over all these manual and repetitive cognitive tasks, if you cannot think critically, if you can't rewire your own brain to solve complex problems, you just become obsolete.
Those are the stakes. So let's look at the solution. The book outlines 5 specific steps to stop this brain rot and actually accelerate your learning capacity to increase your practical intelligence. And I want to be clear here, he's talking about physically changing the brain's hardware, right?
He is.
Yeah.
Which brings us to step 1, belief, or accreditar.
Which, I have to say, sounds a little like a self-help poster. Just believing yourself.
Yeah, it does sound a bit fluffy at first glance,
Uh,
but he approaches it entirely from a neuroscientific perspective.
okay.
The biggest barrier to intelligence is a fixed mindset. Most people grow up believing intelligence is just like their height or their eye color.
Like it's baked in.
Right. You're born a genius or you're born, well, average, and you're just stuck there forever.
I hear that constantly. People say, oh, I'm just not a math person, or I don't have the gene for learning languages.
And Pierre says that is scientifically false. If you believe that, you've already lost the game. To start his program, you have to accept 2 specific premises. First, you have to be humble enough to admit that you have mental flaws. You have to say, I am not as smart as I could be. I have glitches in my programming.
I think most of us can admit to having a few glitches.
But the second premise is the real game changer. You must believe it is entirely possible to eliminate those flaws. He leans heavily into the concept of neuroplasticity here.
Reconfiguring neural networks.
Exactly. He describes the brain not as this static bucket that you just fill up with facts, but as the most powerful computer on Earth, a network that can be rewired and upgraded.
He uses some specific visual examples in the book to prove this, doesn't he?
He does. He talks about how he used to show his students these complex geometric puzzles. At first glance, they just look like chaos.
Just random shapes.
Right. So students would stare at them and see absolutely nothing. But then he would teach them a specific way to look for patterns, how to group the shapes together.
And suddenly the chaos organizes itself.
Instantly. And he points out to them, look, 5 minutes ago, you were totally blind to this pattern. Now you see it effortlessly.
Wow.
That isn't just learning a trivia fact. That is an actual upgrade in your processing speed. He argues that if you can improve your visual reasoning in 5 minutes, imagine what you can do to your logical or linguistic reasoning with 5 months of targeted effort.
So step 1 is basically rejecting the idea that you are stuck with the brain you have. You have to believe you can transition out of being what he bluntly calls burrow or dull.
Correct. Because if you don't believe the hardware can be upgraded, you'll never put in the work to install the new software.
Which leads perfectly into step 2. And I feel like this is where you start stepping on some toes.
Oh, definitely.
Step 2 is avoid stupidity, or evitar aberris.
This is the defensive strategy. Before you can get smarter, you have to stop hemorrhaging intelligence. You have to plug the leaks.
And the biggest leak, according to Pierre, are the anti-intelligence forces we interact with every day, primarily technology.
Specifically, the way we consume it. He is incredibly critical of social media and compulsive internet use. And remember, he wrote this before things like TikTok even existed, so imagine what he would say about short-form video now.
But isn't that just the classic old man yells at cloud argument? Like, kids these days with their phones are ruining everything.
It's easy to dismiss it as that, but looking at the sources he cites, the mechanism he's talking about is very specific. It's about attention fragmentation. He mentions psychiatric studies suggesting the compulsive internet use in youth can lower functional IQ by a terrifying amount.
Yeah, he says it lowers it by double the amount that marijuana use does.
Exactly.
Which, just to be clear to you listening, we aren't endorsing any medical viewpoints here, just reporting what's in the text. But double the impact of marijuana. That is a massive claim to make.
It is massive. But think about the underlying mechanism he's pointing to. Marijuana might make you sluggish or foggy temporarily, but the constant rapid-fire switching of context on social media, 15 seconds of a dance, then 10 seconds of a tragedy, then 5 seconds of a cat video.
It trains the brain to reject deep focus entirely.
You are literally conditioning your neural pathways to be incapable of sustained thought.
You're creating that eternal idiot persona he talks about.
Yes, the eternal idiot.
Mm-hmm.
The person who consumes garbage TV, gossips endlessly on social media, hates studying, and is physically incapable of reading a 10-page article because their brain is just screaming for a cheap dopamine hit.
And he groups this technology addiction with another really controversial topic in this section, the medicalization of behavior.
He's very critical of how quick society is to medicate students, like the irresponsible use of drugs like Ritalin.
For things that look like ADHD but might not be.
Right. Now, he acknowledges that true biological neurological disorders exist,
Yeah.
but he argues they are rare. What is far more common, in his view, is a severe lack of discipline that is masquerading as a medical disorder.
So like a kid who is disorganized, messy, and can't sit still?
Exactly. A kid who acts that way because he's never actually been taught how to organize himself or how to study, and instead of teaching him discipline, we just give him a pill.
We chemically force the focus.
Right. And Kier argues that when you take a healthy brain that is just undisciplined and you flood it with stimulants to force it to pay attention, you are robbing that person of the chance to develop their own internal control mechanisms. You're outsourcing your executive function to a chemical.
Which is a form of avoiding intelligence.
Exactly. So step 2 is a complete detox. Put down the phone, stop looking for a pill to fix bad habits, and stop consuming the garbage content that rots your attention span.
Because if your attention span is broken, you cannot possibly do step 3. And step 3 seems to be the absolute heart of this entire philosophy.
It really is. Step 3, study little.
Estudiar poco. I have to say, if I had told my parents in high school I was following an educational program called Study Little, I would have been grounded indefinitely.
It's a brilliant marketing hook for sure. But the full rule is the real secret. Study little, but study every single day.
Consistency over intensity. But there is a very specific technical definition of the word study here that we need to unpack, because he explicitly says that going to class is not studying.
This might be the most critical distinction in the entire book. He separates the learning process into 2 totally distinct phases: input and storage. Class is just input.
Because you're passive.
Right. You are sitting there, you are watching the teacher, you're hearing the words, you might even be nodding your head. You understand what is being said.
But understanding isn't learning.
No. And this is where millions of students get it wrong. Pierre explains that understanding is a phenomenon that happens entirely in your short-term memory. In your RAM, if we want to use a computer analogy.
RAM. Random access memory, fast, temporary storage for whatever you're actively doing.
Exactly. When you are in a lecture, you are filling up your RAM. You understand the math problem while the teacher is doing it on the board step by step. It makes perfect sense in the moment.
But RAM is volatile memory.
Highly volatile. What happens to a computer's RAM when you pull the power plug?
It gets wiped completely clean.
And for the human brain, pulling the plug is going to sleep.
So wait, if I go to school, sit through 6 hours of classes, understand everything perfectly, and then just go home and go to sleep.
You wake up with a blank hard drive. You have lost almost everything from that day.
That is terrifying.
It is. Because the save function, the process that moves data from temporary RAM to permanent storage, only happens during sleep. But the brain is incredibly selective. It doesn't save everything that happened that day. It only saves what was reinforced.
And this is where the study little part actually comes in.
Right. Studying is the active process you do alone. It is not just rereading the textbook, because reading a textbook passively is just more input.
So what is active?
Writing with a pen, solving problems yourself, wrestling with the material. Peer argues that you absolutely must do this active study on the same day as the class.
Before you sleep.
Before you sleep. If you have a math class in the morning and you do 30 minutes of active problem solving that afternoon, you are signaling to your brain, hey, this data is important. Move it from RAM to the hard drive tonight.
But if I wait until the weekend to review it...
It's too late.
Yeah.
The RAM has already been wiped. You basically have to relearn it from scratch. This is exactly why he hates the cramming model that so many students use.
Where you do nothing for 2 months and then try to study for 10 hours the night before the final exam?
Right.
I mean, I've definitely been guilty of that. And honestly, it works. I pass the tests.
It works for passing, yes, but it doesn't work for learning. Because what you are doing is stuffing your RAM to the absolute bursting point. You walk into the exam room, you vomit the information onto the page, and then you go home and sleep.
And the next day...
It's all gone. Every bit of it. You have the grade, you have the diploma, but you do not have the knowledge. Peer calls this studying for nothing. He actually refers to it as educational bulimia.
Educational bulimia. Binge and purge. That is a gross but incredibly accurate image.
So study little means you don't need these grueling 10-hour study marathons. You just need 30 minutes of active maintenance every single day to ensure that the save function works properly at night.
It turns learning from a panic-induced sprint into just a steady accumulation of wealth.
Precisely.
And speaking of accumulation, he uses this great architecture analogy to explain why this daily habit is so critical for some subjects more than others. The condo versus the skyscraper.
This is one of the best metaphors in the book. He says human knowledge comes in 2 structural types. Some subjects, like history or geography, are like building a condominium complex of small houses. They are horizontal.
Meaning, if I don't know anything about the French Revolution, I can still perfectly learn about the American Civil War. One house doesn't physically rely on the other to stand up.
Exactly. If one house falls down, the rest are completely fine. You can have gaps in your historical foundation and still build elsewhere. But exact sciences, math, physics, chemistry,
Those are skyscrapers.
purely vertical. You cannot build the 7th floor if the 6th floor is missing.
If you miss algebra, you can't just skip ahead to calculus.
You can't. If you didn't truly learn fractions, if you just crammed for the fraction test in middle school and then purged it from your memory, you simply cannot do algebra.
You're trying to hang a floor in midair.
Right. And it's not that you aren't smart enough. It's that you have a structural gap. Realizing this is usually the turning point for adults who walk around saying they're just bad at math.
They weren't bad at math. They just missed a step 3 years ago and never went back to fill the hole.
Exactly. So for those skyscraper subjects, that daily study rule isn't just a helpful suggestion. It is the only way to survive. You cannot cram a foundation.
Okay, so recapping where we are. We've fixed our mindset, we've ditched the digital distractions, and we are studying a little bit every day to save our progress. Now, step 4. This is about what we should be doing with our brains the rest of the time. Seek challenges.
Procure desafios. This is the mental bodybuilding phase of the manual. Peer is very clear about human nature here. The brain is an organ that tries to save energy at all costs. It loves the easy path.
It's lazy by default.
Inherently lazy. But just like your physical muscles only grow when you lift a weight that actually feels heavy, your intelligence only grows when you struggle.
The rule he gives is pretty uncompromising. He says whenever you have a choice between an easy way and a hard way, choose the hard way, which sounds, frankly, exhausting.
It is exhausting.
Yeah.
But that's the whole point. The exhaustion you feel is the physical sensation of your neural networks reconfiguring. He gives a great everyday example about watching movies to illustrate this.
Right, the hierarchy of movie watching.
So, level 1, the lazy brain level, is watching a foreign movie dubbed into your native language, let's say Portuguese for his students. You are receiving the image and the sound in your native tongue. Your brain is a passive bucket. You are doing 0 work.
Level 2.
Original audio, but with subtitles in your native language. Now, you are triangulating. You hear the English, you read the Portuguese, you see the action. Your brain is processing multiple streams of data. That's a bit better.
And the hard way, the way that actually makes you smarter.
Original audio. Subtitles in the original language, or even better, no subtitles at all.
I've actually tried doing that with French films. It gives me a massive headache after about 20 minutes.
And Pierre would look at you and say, good, Cherish that headache. That headache is the friction of learning. If you are watching a movie and you understand 100% of it effortlessly, you are being entertained, but you are not evolving.
You have to learn to derive pleasure from the difficult path.
Yes. He tells a story about a law student that really drives this concept home.
Oh, the guy studying for the OAB exam.
Right, the bar exam in Brazil.
Oh.
So Pierre meets this law student who is just bragging about how he cruises through law school. He copies other people's notes. He uses the easy summary guides. He completely skips the dense original legal texts.
He's hacking the system to get easy A's.
Exactly. And Pierre asks him, what are you studying? The kid says, law. And Pierre asks, well, what is on the bar exam? The kid says, law. And then Pierre just drops the hammer. He asks him, did you realize that your entire 5-year degree is just a 5-year prep course for that one exam? Ouch. The student was completely shocked. He suddenly realized he had spent 5 years actively avoiding the weight, and now he was going to have to walk into the gym on exam day and lift a 500-pound barbell.
Because he hadn't built the muscles. He was just collecting receipts saying he went to the gym.
That is a perfect way to put it. A diploma is just a receipt. It is not the muscle. If you don't seek out the challenge daily, you arrive at the end of the journey with absolutely nothing.
Which brings us to the final step. Step 5. The ultimate tool for building that intelligence. It's not a new app. It's not a nootropic supplement. Step 5 is simply read a lot.
Laura Muito. And to be clear, he doesn't mean reading tweets or short blog posts. He means books.
But why is reading so special? Why is reading a book fundamentally different from watching a really well-researched documentary or listening to a brilliant lecture?
It all comes back to the active versus passive debate. Pierre references Machiavelli here, who categorized human intelligence into 3 levels. The lowest level are those who don't understand things, even when it's explicitly explained to them. They're useless, basically. The middle level are those who understand things when someone else explains it. This is where most people stop.
That's the good student level. You listen, you understand.
Right, but the highest level, those are the people who can understand things by themselves. Those who can take raw data, observe the world, and synthesize meaning without a teacher holding their hand. They are excellent. Pierre argues that reading is the absolute best activity to move you from level 2 to level 3.
Because when you read, you are the director of the experience.
Exactly. Think about the cognitive load. If I show you a movie of a goblin, your visual cortex just registers, okay, green, ugly, small, done. It takes milliseconds. But if you read a written description of a goblin in a novel,
Your brain actually has to build it from scratch.
yes, you have to retrieve the abstract concept of green from your memory, apply it to a shape that you have to construct, animate it in your mind, give it a voice. The sheer neurological activity required to read a novel is massive compared to watching a screen.
It's a full brain workout.
It is.
Yeah.
And it builds the 2 core pillars of intelligence he identifies, language and mathematics. He argues that if you have a limited vocabulary, you literally have limited thoughts. You cannot think complex, nuanced thoughts if you do not have the words to conceptualize them in your own head.
Reading builds the resolution of your mind.
Beautifully said. And he's not saying you have to read boring textbooks. In fact, he criticizes schools for pushing these pedantic, heavy works down kids' throats and killing their love of reading.
He says read for pleasure.
Yeah.
Right.
Fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, trashy romance novels, it really doesn't matter at first. The mechanical act of decoding text and creating a world in your head is the exercise. Just get the reps in.
So let's pull all of this together for you listening. We are facing a future where, as Pierre warns, the eternal idiots are going to be left behind by algorithms and automation. To survive, we need to transition into what he proudly calls a nerd. But his definition of a nerd is really beautiful.
It is a profound shift in perspective. We usually think of the nerd as this socially awkward recluse who just studies all day and has no fun.
Yeah.
Pierre completely flips that.
How so?
He says the eternal idiot is the one who is actually unhappy because they are a victim of their environment. They don't have the mental tools to solve their own problems. They are entirely dependent on others.
And the nerd.
The nerd is the person who has agency. They are intelligent, yes, but because of that intelligence, they are capable. They can learn whatever they need to learn to navigate the world. They are the architects of their own lives. To Pierre, being a nerd is about being happy and healthy because you are highly competent.
So the roadmap to becoming that person, the survival manual, is these 5 steps. 1, belief. Admit you have glitches, but know you can absolutely upgrade your hardware.
2, avoid stupidity. Stop fracturing your attention span with social media and looking for chemical fixes for bad habits.
3. Study little, but study every day. Move that crucial data from your volatile RAM to your hard drive before you sleep.
4. Seek challenges. If it's easy, you aren't learning. Take the stairs, watch movies without subtitles.
And 5. Read a lot. Constantly, voraciously, for pleasure. Build your internal world.
It really is a complete lifestyle overhaul. It's not about cramming to pass a test next Friday. It's about ensuring that 10 years from now, your brain is a towering skyscraper, not just a pile of scattered rubble.
It's an incredibly compelling argument. It honestly makes me want to turn off my phone right now and just go pick up a thick book.
That is exactly the reaction he wanted. It's the best thing you could possibly do.
Professor Pierre leaves us with one final, provocative question to mull over. Are you actively building your brain, or are you just sitting back and watching it atrophy? The answer, fortunate or unfortunately, depends entirely on you.
Because nobody else can do the push-ups for you.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Now go do the work.
And don't forget to sleep well.
We'll see you next time.